The jungle holds many secrets, but none more haunting than the silence of a broken warrior. In the remote clearing, deep within a forest that civilization had long forgotten, Captain Silas sat motionless, his 70-year-old frame frozen in a posture that spoke of absolute psychological surrender. His weathered hands, which had once commanded troops through the hell of forgotten wars, now trembled uncontrollably. His eyes, usually sharp and calculating, stared into nothingness, seeing not the beauty of the forest around him, but the suffocating smoke and chaos of a battlefield that existed only in his fractured mind. This was not peace. This was defeat. The kind of defeat that doesn't kill the body, but annihilates the soul. Beside him, Blanco, his massive white Dogo Argentino, stood with every muscle tensed, his powerful frame radiating an urgency that bordered on desperation. The dog's intense dark eyes were not scanning the tree line for danger. They were locked on his master's face, watching the light of consciousness fade from those human eyes, witnessing the exact moment when the veteran's mind abandoned his body to the ghosts of war. And then, from the dense undergrowth, came the sound that would turn this psychological crisis into a fight for survival. A low, guttural growl that vibrated through the humid air like a death sentence. Two golden eyes emerged from the shadows, belonging to one of nature's most perfect killers, a jaguar, a beast that had stalked these woods for years. Learning that stillness in prey meant weakness, meant vulnerability, meant an easy kill, the predator had found its target. But what it didn't know was that it wasn't just hunting a paralyzed old man. It was challenging the unbreakable bond between a soldier who had lost himself and a dog who was about to wage war, not just for his master's life, but for his very soul. The jaguar saw weakness. Blanco saw his entire world collapsing. The beast prepared to strike. The Dogo Argentino prepared to fulfill what Captain Silas called the old soldier's last oath, the sacred promise that a warrior never surrenders to his demons, never allows the war to win, never abandons his post, even when that post is his own fractured mind. But to understand the sacrifice Blanco was about to make, to comprehend the depth of loyalty that would drive a dog to face certain death, we need to go back to the beginning. To the moment when a broken soldier found his only anchor in a world that had become unbearable. But before we dive into this battle for a soldier's soul, if you, like us, believe that the greatest heroism lies in loyalty and the silent bonds that hold us together when everything else falls apart, help us honor these stories. Leave a comment below telling us which country you're watching from. And subscribe to the Wind Echo Untold channel so more people can join our mission to celebrate the deepest connections between warriors and their guardians. Captain Silas had once been a legend in the military circles that dealt with operations the world would never read about in history books. He was the kind of soldier who received medals in closed-door ceremonies, whose missions were erased from official records, whose sacrifices would never be acknowledged by the public. For 30 years, he carried out orders that required him to make impossible choices, to witness horrors that would shatter most men, to survive when survival itself felt like a betrayal of those who didn't make it back. When he finally retired, he didn't return to a hero's welcome. He returned to silence. He traded his uniform for solitude, his medals for isolation, his purpose for the crushing weight of memories he couldn't escape. The doctors called it post-traumatic stress disorder, but Silas called it the silent monster, the enemy that lived inside his mind, ambushing him in moments of quiet, dragging him back to battlefields where his brothers died screaming, where he made decisions that saved missions but cost lives, where the line between right and wrong disappeared in the fog of war. The flashbacks were relentless and unpredictable. A car backfiring could send him into a full combat stance. The smell of diesel could transport him instantly to a burning convoy. The sound of children playing could morph into the cries of civilians caught in crossfire. He tried therapy, medication, meditation, but nothing worked. The war lived in his nervous system, in his muscle memory, in the very architecture of his traumatized brain. He was a prisoner of his own mind, and the sentence was life without parole. That's when he found Blanco. Or perhaps Blanco found him. The Dogo Argentino breed is known for its fierce loyalty and courage, originally bred in Argentina to hunt big game, including pumas and wild boars. They are massive, powerful, and fearless. But Blanco was different. When Silas first saw him at the specialized service animal training facility, the dog was only 2 years old, but already showed an unusual sensitivity to human emotion. Where other dogs were being trained to retrieve items or open doors, Blanco was being trained to recognize the subtle signs of psychological distress, the micro-expressions, the changes in breathing patterns, the chemical shifts in human scent that occurred during a panic attack or flashback. Silas adopted him, not as a pet, but as a battle partner, a new kind of soldier for a new kind of war. He spent months training Blanco to recognize the specific signs of his episodes, the way his pupils would dilate and fix on nothing, the way his breathing would become shallow and rapid, the way his hands would reach for weapons that weren't there. Blanco learned to interrupt these episodes with physical intervention, nudging Silas hard, barking sharply in his face, even gently biting his arm to create a sensory shock that could pull him back to reality. For 5 years, this partnership worked. Blanco became more than a service dog. He became Silas's tether to the present, his anchor in reality, his reason to stay grounded. The captain's life developed a new rhythm. They lived in a small cabin on the edge of the forest, far from the triggers of civilization. Their days were simple: long walks, quiet meals, the meditation of manual work like carving wood or repairing old tools. Silas taught Blanco not just commands, but a code, the old soldier's last oath. It was simple: never surrender to the enemy within. Fight for your mind with the same courage you fought for your country. Never let the ghosts win. This particular morning had started like any other. They set out at dawn to search for a rare medicinal plant that grew deep in the forest, something Silas used to make tea that helped him sleep. The walk was peaceful, the air clean and cool, the sunlight filtering through the canopy in shafts of gold. Silas felt good, felt present, felt almost normal. Blanco walked beside him, occasionally glancing up at his master's face, performing his constant welfare checks with the diligence of a sentry on watch. They reached the clearing where the plant grew, and Silas knelt down to carefully harvest the leaves, placing them in a worn canvas bag. It was a moment of pure tranquility, the kind of moment that had become precious to him, a moment when the past stayed in the past and the present felt safe. He took out his old military canteen and took a drink, the metal cool against his lips. Everything was perfect. Everything was calm. And then it happened. A sound, not loud but specific. A sharp crack from somewhere in the forest, distant but clear. It was probably just a branch breaking, perhaps a deer stepping on dead wood. But the frequency, the timbre, the exact acoustic signature of that sound matched something stored deep in Silas's traumatic memory. The sound of a rifle bolt being pulled back. The preparatory click before an ambush. The last thing he heard before his unit was attacked in that final, horrific mission 30 years ago. His body reacted before his conscious mind could intervene. His pupils dilated. His breathing stopped. His muscles locked. The present moment dissolved like smoke, and he was no longer in the peaceful forest. He was back in that hellscape, surrounded by fire and screaming and the faces of dying men who called his name as they bled out in his arms. He had failed them then. He was failing again now. The psychological response was complete and absolute. Captain Silas, the warrior who had survived impossible odds, was gone. Only the shell of his body remained, kneeling in the dirt, utterly paralyzed by a memory. Blanco sensed the change instantly. He moved in front of his master, his massive head pushing against Silas's chest. He barked once, twice, sharp commanding sounds meant to shock the system, to bring the soldier back. But this time, the flashback was too strong, the grip of trauma too powerful. Silas's eyes remained fixed on the horror only he could see. The Dogo Argentino had failed his primary mission, to keep his master's mind in the present. And in that moment of failure, in that second when Blanco realized his guardian techniques weren't working, the forest revealed its second, far more immediate threat. The Jaguar had been watching them for the past 10 minutes, tracking their movement through the underbrush with the patient calculation of an apex predator. It had learned over years of hunting that the forest provided two types of prey, those who were alert and difficult, and those who were compromised and easy. The moment Silas froze, the moment his posture changed from watchful to catatonic, the Jaguar recognized opportunity. This was not a healthy, aware target. This was prey that had already given up. And now the dog's attention was divided, focused inward on the human rather than outward on the threat. The hunt was about to begin. The Jaguar moved through the undergrowth with liquid grace, each muscle rippling beneath its spotted coat with the efficiency of millions of years of evolutionary perfection. This was not a creature that acted on impulse. It was a strategist, a patient killer that understood the language of weakness. And right now, it was reading the situation in the clearing with the cold intelligence that made it the apex predator of these woods. Blanco's head snapped toward the direction of the threat. His training kicked in immediately, overriding the distress of his failed intervention with Silas. The Dogo Argentino positioned himself between his paralyzed master and the emerging danger, his powerful body forming a living shield, his stance wide and balanced, every ounce of his 90 pounds of pure muscle ready for combat. His ears were forward, his tail rigid, his dark eyes locked onto the shadows where the Jaguar was slowly, deliberately revealing itself. The Jaguar stepped out of the undergrowth with an arrogance that spoke of absolute confidence. It was a male, perhaps 180 pounds of raw predatory power, its coat a stunning mosaic of rosettes against tawny gold. But it was the eyes that told the real story, cold, calculating, utterly without mercy. Those eyes swept over the scene, an old man frozen in some kind of paralytic state, completely defenseless, and a single dog, admittedly large and muscular, but ultimately alone. The Jaguar's lips curled back, revealing fangs designed to pierce skulls and crush spines. It let out a low, rumbling growl that was less a warning and more a statement of intent. The message was clear. The human was already defeated, already dead in everything but the technical sense. The dog was simply an inconvenience, a minor obstacle to be removed before claiming the easy kill. There was contempt in that sound, a dismissal of both the paralyzed veteran's dignity and the Dogo's ability to mount any meaningful defense. Blanco answered with a roar that erupted from deep in his chest, a sound that would have made most predators reconsider. But his eyes never left his master's face, even as his body faced the threat. He was fighting two battles simultaneously, the physical one against the beast before him, and the desperate psychological one to bring Silas back from whatever hell he was trapped in. The Dogo's message was equally clear: you will not touch him. You will not exploit his moment of vulnerability. You will go through me first. The Jaguar's ears flattened against its skull. The dog's defiance was unexpected, interesting even. Most animals, when faced with a Jaguar, chose flight over fight. But this white dog was not retreating, it was challenging. The predator began to circle slowly, testing the boundaries of the Dogo's defensive perimeter, looking for angles, searching for weaknesses in the guard. Each step was measured, calculated, a chess player thinking 3 moves ahead. Blanco rotated with the movement, keeping his body squarely between the Jaguar and Silas, never allowing the predator a clear path to the vulnerable human. His breathing was controlled, his muscles coiled but not yet committed. He was burning energy maintaining this perfect defensive stance, and the Jaguar knew it. This was the first subtle attack: wear down the defender, make him work for every inch. Exhaust him before the real violence began. The Jaguar suddenly fainted left, a blur of golden muscle that suggested it was about to commit to an attack on Blanco's flank. The Dogo shifted immediately to intercept, his massive head turning to track the threat. But it was a deception, a test of the dog's priorities. The instant Blanco shifted, the Jaguar reversed direction with impossible speed, darting right and trying to circle around the dog's defensive position to reach the paralyzed Silas directly. This was the psychological warfare of predation. The Jaguar was asking a question. Is this dog fighting for his own survival, or is he truly committed to defending the broken human? If Blanco's primary instinct was self-preservation, he would have protected his own throat, his own body. But if his commitment to the soldier was absolute, he would sacrifice his own safety to maintain the defense. Blanco's response was immediate and devastating to witness. He threw his entire body sideways, cutting off the Jaguar's path at the cost of exposing his own shoulder to the predator's claws. The Jaguar's paw, extended in its feint and strike maneuver, raked across the Dogo's white coat, leaving 4 parallel gashes that immediately welled with blood. The pain must have been excruciating, but Blanco made no sound. He absorbed the injury without a whimper, without even a flinch, and successfully closed the gap, forcing the Jaguar back and re-establishing the defensive perimeter around Silas. The message was delivered in blood and silence. My life is secondary to my mission. You will not use tactics, deception, or pain to make me abandon my post. This is not negotiable. The Jaguar paused, reassessing. The dog was not behaving like prey, or even like a typical defender. It was behaving like a soldier, like something that understood sacrifice, that had been trained in a code that transcended instinct. This made the situation more complicated, but also more intriguing. The predator's contempt began to shift into something else, a dark respect for a worthy opponent, mixed with the determination to prove that even the strongest loyalty could be broken by sufficient violence. Behind Blanco, Silas remained frozen, his consciousness still lost in the smoke and horror of that long-ago battlefield. But somewhere in the depths of his traumatized mind, some part of him was registering the sounds of conflict, the smell of blood, the vibration of growls through the earth. The veteran's hands began to tremble more violently, not from the present danger, but from the memory of watching his brothers die while he survived. The guilt that had poisoned every moment of his life since that day. The Jaguar stopped circling. The time for testing was over. It had determined that the dog would not break through psychological pressure or minor injury. The only path to the vulnerable human was through the complete destruction of his guardian. The predator's entire demeanor changed. Its muscles bunched, its pupils dilated, its breathing deepened. This was no longer a hunt. This was war. The Jaguar launched itself forward with explosive power, a golden missile of teeth and claws aimed directly at Blanco's throat. The Dogo met the charge head-on, their bodies colliding with a sound like thunder. The force of the impact sent both animals rolling through the dirt, a blur of white and gold, of flashing fangs and raking claws. Blanco fought with the controlled fury of his breed, using his massive jaws to seek purchase, his powerful neck muscles designed to hold on even under extreme punishment. But the Jaguar was pure, primal violence, a creature that killed for a living, that had brought down prey twice its size. The fight was brutal and intimate. Bone scraped against bone, teeth tore into muscle, claws found flesh. The two apex predators were locked in a death spiral, each trying to find the killing hold, each refusing to yield. Blanco managed to clamp his jaws onto the Jaguar's foreleg, his bite force, over 500 pounds per square inch, designed to crush bone. The Jaguar roared in pain and fury, but instead of retreating, it used its superior weight and flexibility to twist its body, breaking Blanco's grip and countering with a devastating move, in a display of raw power that showcased why Jaguars are pound for pound the strongest big cats in the Americas. The predator managed to pin Blanco to the ground, its massive paws sinking into the Dogo's chest, its full weight pressing down with the intention of crushing ribs and collapsing lungs. The Jaguar's face was inches from Blanco's throat, its jaws opening wide, preparing for the killing bite that would sever the spinal cord. This was the twist of fate, the moment when the bond between soldier and guardian faced its ultimate test. Blanco was losing, Not because he lacked courage or strength, but because the Jaguar was simply a more efficient killer, more experienced in the art of death. The Dogo's legs kicked desperately, trying to find purchase, trying to throw off the crushing weight. His breathing became labored, the pressure on his chest making it impossible to draw a full breath. Blood from his earlier wounds and new ones stained his white coat crimson, and in that moment of supreme physical crisis, something else happened. Behind the pinned dog, Silas's face registered a change. Still deep in his flashback, still lost in the memory of battle, his traumatized mind somehow registered the sounds of the fight behind him. But in his fractured perception, the growls of the animals became the screams of his dying unit. The desperate scrabbling of claws on earth became the sounds of wounded men trying to crawl to safety. The wet sounds of violence became the horrific soundtrack of that day when he survived and they didn't. A single tear rolled down the captain's weathered cheek. His lips moved, forming words that no one could hear. "I'm sorry. I'm sorry I couldn't save you. I'm sorry I lived when you died." The guilt, the shame, the unbearable weight of survivor's trauma that had poisoned 30 years of his life crystallized in that moment. He was about to lose Blanco, the only living being he had allowed himself to love since the war. And it was happening because he had failed again, because he had surrendered to his demons, because he had abandoned his post when his guardian needed him most. The situation wasn't just grave. It was a complete betrayal of the old soldier's last oath. The promise to never let the war win was being broken in real time. And the cost was going to be paid in the blood of the one creature who had never judged him, never abandoned him, never stopped believing he was worth saving. And then, from beneath the crushing weight of the Jaguar, Blanco made a sound that was utterly unlike any of his previous battle cries. It was a high-pitched, desperate whine, a sound of pure distress that pierced through the layers of Silas's traumatic dissociation like a bullet through flesh. It was not the sound of a warrior. It was the sound of a soul breaking, the sound of loyalty pushed beyond its limits. The sound of a dog who was about to die, not for lack of courage, but because the person he loved had stopped fighting. That sound was the key that turned in the lock of Silas's fractured mind. Because it was new, because it was wrong, because in 5 years of partnership, he had never heard Blanco sound defeated. And that wrongness, that violation of everything he knew about his guardian, created a crack in the prison of his flashback. The whimper cut through the smoke and screams of Silas's memory like a blade through silk. For a fraction of a second, two realities overlapped in his consciousness, the battlefield of 30 years ago and the forest clearing of right now. In the memory, men were dying and calling his name. In reality, his dog was dying and calling for him with that terrible, desperate sound. The cognitive dissonance was so profound, so jarring, that it created a shock to his system more powerful than any of Blanco's trained interventions. Silas's pupils contracted sharply, his eyes losing their 1,000-yard stare and suddenly focusing. The smoke and fire of the flashback didn't fade gradually. It shattered like glass, and the present moment came rushing back with brutal clarity. He saw the Jaguar pinning Blanco, saw the blood, saw his guardian's legs weakening as the crushing pressure on his chest became unsustainable. The captain's tactical mind, dormant for the past eternal minutes, came roaring back online with the instant clarity of a combat veteran who had spent decades making life-and-death decisions in milliseconds. Blanco, even in his moment of supreme physical crisis, felt the change in his master. The Dogo's dark eyes, still bright with consciousness despite the crushing weight on his chest, locked onto Silas's face. And in that look passed a communication so profound, so complete, that it transcended any need for language. The dog was not begging to be saved. He was not asking Silas to intervene. He was delivering a final message. You are back. You are present. The last oath is fulfilled. Now you must live. Now you must remember who you are. Silas understood with absolute clarity that Blanco's entire battle strategy from the beginning had not been simply about protecting his body from the Jaguar. It had been about protecting his soul from the war. The Dogo had bought time, had absorbed injury, had fought beyond reason, not just to keep the predator away, but to create enough noise, enough violence, enough wrongness in the world that it would penetrate the fog of Silas's trauma and pull him back to reality. Blanco had turned himself into a living alarm, a sacrifice designed not to win the physical fight, but to win the psychological one. The revelation was crushing in its emotional weight. Silas had spent 5 years training Blanco to interrupt his flashbacks, never fully realizing that the dog had been training him to fight back, to not surrender to the ghosts, to stay present even when the past tried to pull him under. The old soldier's last oath wasn't just Silas's promise to himself. It was Blanco's promise to Silas. I will never let you disappear. I will fight for your mind even if it costs me everything. The captain's eyes dropped to the wound on Blanco's shoulder. The one the dog had taken earlier while defending him, the one that was still bleeding. He saw the newer injuries, the blood soaking into white fur, the labored breathing. And he saw something else. The intelligence in those dark eyes, the way Blanco was deliberately not trying to fight the Jaguar's grip in the conventional way. The Dogo was waiting, conserving what little strength he had left, preparing for one final move that would require perfect timing and absolute trust that his master would take the opening. Silas moved. Not with the confused sluggishness of someone emerging from trauma, but with the cold, lethal efficiency of the special operations soldier he had been. His hand shot out to his side, closing around a heavy fallen branch, a piece of hardwood as thick as his forearm and weighted like a club. In the same motion, he pushed himself up from his kneeling position. His old muscles remembering the training, the countless hours of combat drills, the muscle memory of a warrior that trauma could suppress but never fully erase. Blanco felt his master's movement and executed his final gambit. Instead of continuing to struggle against the crushing weight on his chest, the Dogo twisted his head with incredible neck strength and sank his powerful jaws not into the Jaguar's throat, a target he couldn't reach, but into the predator's exposed hind leg, the one that was extended for balance while the Jaguar's weight pressed down. The Dogo's bite locked on like a mechanical vice, his jaws designed by generations of breeding to hold on to dangerous game no matter what happened. The effect was instantaneous and devastating. The Jaguar roared in shocked pain and fury, the sudden agony in its leg completely disrupting its focus and balance. The crushing pressure on Blanco's chest released as the predator instinctively tried to turn and deal with this unexpected new source of pain. Its attention, which had been entirely focused on delivering the killing bite to the Dogo's throat, fractured. It was the opening, the single moment of distraction that could mean the difference between death and survival. Silas took the shot. There was no hesitation, no debate, no trauma-induced paralysis. He brought the heavy branch down in a controlled, devastating arc, striking the Jaguar's skull with the full force of a desperate man fighting not just for life, but for redemption. The impact was solid, the sound of wood against bone echoing through the clearing like a gunshot. The Jaguar's eyes rolled, its pupils dilating with the sudden trauma of the concussive blow. The predator's grip on Blanco released entirely as its body tried to process the new threat. The unexpected pain coming from a target it had dismissed as no longer capable of fighting back. The Jaguar stumbled sideways, dazed and confused, its predatory calculus completely upended. This was no longer an easy kill. This was a coordinated ambush by two defenders who fought with the synchronized efficiency of soldiers who had trained together, who trusted each other absolutely, who were willing to die for each other. Blanco, freed from the crushing weight, immediately rolled to his feet despite his injuries and positioned himself once more between Silas and the threat, his bloodied face a mask of pure determination. Silas stood beside him, the branch still gripped in his hands, his stance wide and balanced, his eyes fully present now, fully aware, locked on the Jaguar with the cold calculation of a man who had survived worse and would not break again. The Jaguar, shaking its massive head to clear the stunning effects of the blow, assessed the new situation. The paralyzed prey was now a combatant. The lone dog was now part of a coordinated team. The easy kill had become a genuine threat to its own survival. Big cats are intelligent hunters, and this one understood that the cost-benefit analysis had shifted dramatically. The risk now outweighed the potential reward. With a final, frustrated snarl that was more about saving face than actual aggression, the Jaguar backed away, moving slowly at first, then faster, until it turned and disappeared into the undergrowth with the liquid silence it had arrived with. The beast was gone. The battle was over. Silas dropped the branch, his hands shaking not from trauma, but from the adrenaline crash of combat. He collapsed to his knees beside Blanco, his arms wrapping around the massive white dog, holding him close. Feeling the rapid heartbeat against his chest, the warm blood soaking into his shirt. The shallow but steady breathing that meant his guardian was alive, was surviving, was still here. The captain's face pressed into Blanco's fur, and for the first time in 30 years, tears came not from guilt or shame, but from overwhelming gratitude and love. "You didn't give up on me," Silas whispered into the dog's ear, his voice raw with emotion. "Even when I gave up on myself, you didn't stop fighting. You brought me back. You saved me." Blanco's tail, despite the pain and exhaustion, managed a single weak thump against the ground. His dark eyes, still bright with intelligence and awareness, looked up at his master with an expression that communicated everything. "We won. You kept the oath. You are still worthy. The war is over." In that moment, kneeling in the dirt of a remote forest clearing, surrounded by blood and the evidence of violence, Captain Silas understood the true meaning of the old soldier's last oath. It had never been about avoiding death or even about defeating external enemies. It had been about refusing to surrender to the internal ones, about staying present even when the past tried to drag him under, about proving to himself that he was still capable of standing up and fighting when it mattered most. Blanco had not saved him from the Jaguar. Blanco had saved him from himself, by forcing him out of the flashback and back into the present moment, by creating a situation so urgent that it pierced through the fog of trauma. The Dogo Argentino had proven to Silas that his honor was still intact, that he was still capable of protecting those he loved, that he was still worthy of being the soldier he once was. The war may have scarred him, but the dog had healed the wound that mattered most, the belief that he was broken beyond repair. The sun was lower in the sky by the time Silas finished tending to Blanco's wounds as best he could with the limited supplies in his pack. The gashes on the Dogo's shoulder and chest were deep but clean, the bleeding already slowing thanks to the dog's robust constitution. Silas used strips torn from his shirt to create makeshift bandages, his hands steady now, his mind clear and present. Throughout the careful work, Blanco remained still, trusting completely. Occasionally licking his master's hand in reassurance, they stayed in the clearing for a long time, neither moving, both processing what had happened. Silas didn't look at the trail of broken branches where the Jaguar had disappeared. He looked at Blanco's face, at the intelligence and devotion in those dark eyes, and finally understood the depth of the gift he had been given. For 5 years, he had thought he was rescuing a dog, giving purpose to an animal, training a service companion. But the truth was exactly the opposite. Blanco had been rescuing him, giving him purpose, training him to be present, to fight for his own mind with the same courage he had once fought for his country. The journey back to the cabin was slow, with Silas supporting much of Blanco's weight, stopping frequently to let the injured dog rest. When they finally reached home, the captain worked through the evening, properly cleaning and treating the wounds, administering the basic veterinary supplies he kept for emergencies. Blanco accepted the care with patient dignity, never whimpering, his tail offering occasional thumps of approval when Silas spoke to him in soothing tones. In the days that followed, something fundamental had shifted in their relationship. Silas no longer saw Blanco as his guardian or service animal. He saw him as what he truly was, a brother in arms, a fellow soldier who had fought the hardest battle, and won not through violence, but through unwavering loyalty. The captain began sleeping better, the nightmares less frequent, less intense. When the flashbacks did come, he found he could resist them now. Could ground himself using the techniques Blanco had been trying to teach him all along. The Dogo Argentino recovered with the remarkable resilience of his breed. Within 2 weeks, the wounds were healing cleanly. Within a month, he was walking without pain. The scars on his white coat became badges of honor, visible reminders of the day he fought not just a beast, but the demons in his master's mind. Silas sometimes ran his fingers over those scars and felt not sadness, but profound gratitude. The true legacy of the old soldier's last oath was this: the greatest enemy a warrior can face is not the one with teeth and claws, not the one with guns and explosives, but the one that lives inside the mind. The enemy that whispers that you are broken, that you are weak, and that you are no longer worthy of the honor you once carried. Captain Silas had been fighting that enemy for 30 years, and he'd been losing, slowly surrendering ground, slowly accepting that the war had won. But Blanco refused to accept that surrender. The Dogo Argentino, with the simple, profound loyalty that defines his breed, fought for his master's soul with the same courage that Silas had once fought for his country. He didn't do it with therapy or medication or complex psychological techniques. He did it by being present, by refusing to abandon his post even when the mission seemed impossible, by demonstrating through his own sacrifice that loyalty is not just an emotion, but a code, a standard, a sacred promise that transcends personal safety. In saving Silas from the Jaguar, Blanco taught the captain the most important lesson: that honor is not something that can be destroyed by trauma, that courage is not the absence of fear, but the choice to act despite it, and that a warrior's true measure is not whether he falls, but whether he stands back up when his brothers need him. 6 months after the incident, Silas started volunteering at the Veterans Center in the nearest town, a 2-hour drive from his cabin. He brought Blanco with him, and together they worked with other veterans struggling with PTSD. The captain didn't give speeches or lead therapy groups. He simply sat with men and women who understood the weight of service, who carried their own silent monsters, and he told them his story. He showed them Blanco's scars. He explained the old soldier's last oath. Many of those veterans went on to adopt their own service dogs, inspired by the bond they witnessed. But more importantly, they learned what Silas learned: that asking for help is not weakness, that accepting support is not surrender, and that the battle for your own mind is just as worthy, just as honorable as any fight on any battlefield, Captain.